This week on Gymwright Live, we interview Dr. Mike T. Nelson of Extreme Human Performance to learn exactly how to create and implement an effective nutrition program at your gym. Check it out. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Gymwright Live. I am your host, Marcus Gursey, and with me today we have Dr. Mike T. Nelson. What's up, Mike?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you guys?
We are doing great, or I'm doing great. It's Friday. It's a beautiful day. Can't complain. And
yes, it is very nice.
You're on the road, I believe, right?
Yeah, I just ran back to my hotel room here. I'm presenting at the Fitness Summit in Kansas City.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for taking some time out and joining us today. Excited to have you on. Mike is, and I'm going to actually follow my notes here because you have a lot to your bio and your history, and I don't want to mess it up and give you due respect here. So, for those of you who don't know, Dr. Mike T. Nelson, he is the founder and head honcho at Extreme Human Performance. He is a PhD, he's a university instructor, and he's been called in to share his methods at top government military agencies. The techniques he's developed and the result Mike gets for his clients have been featured in international magazines, scientific publications, and on websites across the globe. You've been on every podcast that matters on the planet. And Mike and I met a couple years ago back in a mastermind and just kind of hit it off. Great guy and one of the coolest nerds I've ever met. So glad to have you on, man.
Thank you. That's all very high praise. I appreciate it.
Right on, man. Well, and I'm excited to share with you or with the audience today here some of your knowledge and experience in creating and implementing an effective nutrition program, because it's one of the biggest value adds we can do at our gyms beyond our training to really help maximize results for our clients. So I'm excited to dig in. What we're going to be talking about today, guys, is what gyms can do for nutrition work with clients, the legalities of it, pros and cons of only doing the 30-day nutrition challenges that we've all done at our gyms, and a better approach to doing so. Why gyms need a system for nutrition, just like you have for training, and there's tons of information Mike's going to share with us. So let's get started. First question, Mike. Why should a gym owner even care about this?
Yeah, it's because you could argue that, I don't know if it was Lee Labrada that said years ago that the big argument, right? What's better, exercise or nutrition? And it's just that they're like two wheels on a bike. If you've got one wheel that's completely missing or very square, trying to fix that wheel is going to be in your client's best interest. I think a lot of gyms, especially kind of in the CrossFit type group model space, are doing much better with exercise. And I think that's come a long way from where it used to be, which we'll get into. But I think nutrition is still kind of hit or miss for various reasons we'll discuss. And that's obviously a big part of the reason clients are coming in for body composition and performance changes.
Awesome. Yeah, in my experience, it's been, especially these days, I think the industry is maturing now to a point to where, like you said, the CrossFit and just functional movement overall has really taken hold. And I think the quality of training has gone up dramatically over the last 10 years in what kind of the standard is now within facilities. And I think the next wave in evolution that's happening right now is that gym owners are beginning to also now integrate higher level nutrition support to really kind of close the loop for their clients. Because at the end of the day, like you said, most people are coming to them for, I want to look better, feel better, perform better. And yes, the training is a huge part of that. But I like your analogy about the two wheels on a bike, in that it's really only half the equation. And a lot of times you'll have clients even for years at a gym, they're like, man, why don't I have the results even though I train my butt off 4 days a week? And it's because they aren't getting the support with the other half of the equation. So what's your experience been in working with gyms? I know you help a lot of gym owners and coaches with this sort of thing. What's your experience been in helping someone who's gone from, or maybe coming from no background in nutrition to getting a foundation and implementing something like this?
Yeah, what I find is that's kind of the system that I set up. I wanted it to be, so if you have a relatively large gym, could you take one person and just dedicate part of their time? Because when I go around and I talk to different trainers, there's usually a trainer in their gym that's like super into nutrition, right? They don't really kind of know what to do with it at that point. So is there things we can do to get them educated, to give them also a system of where to start, right? Because there's so many different places to start, and then how do you progress, right? So it's very similar to exercise. Right? Do you do some type of assessment? Where do you have them go? Where do you have them start? And then how do you have them progress from there? You can do the exact same thing with nutrition of saying, okay, in my experience and based on the research, here's a really good starting point for the vast majority of your clients. Start here, do this next. Make it, kind of a flexible framework. The analogy I give is if you were to have like a bowling alley and they inflated those little bumpers on the side of the lane, you're allowing the client to kind of drift back and forth. But as the coach or the person working the system, you're kind of those little bumpers, right? You don't want them to end up like 4 lanes, on the other side, like off doing something super crazy, but you want them to kind of vary a little bit as they go down, but within some type of containment. And that usually works a lot better. And then just kind of giving them enough space to progress through there and giving them the tools and education they need to do that.
Awesome. So what can gyms do for nutrition work with their clients? And I know there's legalities with this sort of thing that I think the line gets crossed on accidentally and even sometimes intentionally, but how does that all work?
Yeah, and obviously I'm not an attorney, so you have to check with your local state laws because they also vary. But in general, you can provide educational material about nutrition in pretty much every state. Now, of course, we're not going out saying, oh, you're a type 2 diabetic, so do this specific thing, right? You're obviously not trying to treat any type of medical condition. You're never trying to diagnose or prescribe anything. But the reality of the matter is people are already eating, right? You're just trying to give them better education, maybe put that in a system with a little bit of accountability so that they're doing and making better choices. You're not really trying to treat any disease or anything like that. And it is true that some states are super strict on what you can and cannot say. Other states, not really as strict. But pretty much every state, you can provide educational material to people. And again, very similar to exercise, right? You're not trying to be their physical therapist. You're just trying to provide them some type of stimulus for whatever they're doing for exercise. It's, in my opinion, very similar again on the nutrition side, but all sorts of groups are now trying to get their own little piece and kind of keep it in their area too.
Got it. Okay. One thing I wanted to really dig in with you on was the 30-day nutrition challenges, because those are probably the most common tool used by gyms, to kind of help get people interested, get people started. I hear great stories. I hear, stories of where they, we couldn't get anybody to comply. What's your take on all this?
I think even in the best case scenario, it's kind of like a big Band-Aid. Because what I'll see a lot of gyms who are very successful at doing 30-day challenges is they just kind of jump from one to the next to the next to the next. Mm-hmm. And maybe if you're trying to find one that kind of fits most of your clients, that may be okay. But there's no progression. There's no transition from one. It would be like if you just did a 30-day program with your clients for exercise all the time, and you just change the 30-day program with no thought going into, okay, what's the long-term goal? Where am I actually trying to get these people? What's the progression? Mm-hmm. I'd say on the worst side, some of them can be very restrictive. I've seen in general, a lot of people do pretty good for 30 days and then they just all hell breaks loose after that. Right. Here's kind of your naughty and nice list and do this. They do okay for a while. And then day 31, they're like, I don't know. I don't feel like I can keep going on this route, and I really can't live the rest of my life this way either. there's not as much thought put into the long-term progression of it.
Right. I think they can be, where I've seen them work best was when they're used as a tool to kind of get everybody's initial interest and jumpstart people and ultimately get them onto a continuity program for nutrition. It's not the actual solution, but it could be a good tool to say, hey guys, we're going to do a nutrition seminar. We're going to teach you guys, our principles or our philosophies on, good versus bad. And to get people to kind of maybe chop out some of those initial naughty things from their routine, and to kind of get some people working together as a team. It can be a fun thing, and when that's the starting point, and then saying, okay, well then we're gonna work with individuals who want to keep this going and actually integrate this into their life, is when I see it work best. But do you recommend doing any of these kinds of things at all with the gyms that you work with, or is it really just let's not worry about the challenges at all and let's go straight to working with the individual athlete?
Yeah, my bias is just kind of take on the bigger elephant in the room and just start with that. And you can make it very manageable, so you're not trying to overwhelm people either. And I think my feeling is that works better long term. And I agree with you. You could make an argument that like a 30-day, jumpstart program when people are all, super motivated works. Hey, as long as you have something to kind of transition them into, that's cool. I'm down with that. But most gyms I talk to, I'm a bigger fan of, let's just kind of transition them into the system. If you think it's going to be too overwhelming, just take maybe like your 15 clients or whatever. You don't have to start with everyone in your gym. Just run a few test pilots or however you want to kind of, get your feet wet into it. And then once you get more experience, you can expand it out. But I'm a little bit bigger fan of doing that and then making those bite-sized pieces easier and then have that go out a little bit more like a slower drip instead of standing in front of the faucet, the fire hose.
Yeah, for sure. So what, I guess let's start with if someone's watching this as a gym owner and they're thinking, okay, sounds interesting. I've always wanted to implement a better nutrition system or create an upsell program basically on top of my membership, which is really the bigger, if we're looking at it from a business standpoint.
Sure.
We're going to be able to get our clients better results. We create more revenue per client. And we're legitimately adding immense value to their life, not just for the duration of the program, but really long term, because this is about teaching them how to change their habits altogether, right? So it is a win-win-win across the board. Where do we begin? What's the first step for someone watching this?
Yeah, I think there's two first steps. So the first step is the easiest one, I think, is just to go out to your current clients and whatever script, whatever you want to use, and explain to them that, nutrition's, about the other half of the equation, especially for body composition, arguably performance, kind of like the two wheels on the bike, and see if people are interested in doing more work from a client perspective in that area. So maybe you get 30%, maybe you get 50%. And what I explained to them is that you're already eating, right? It's not like exercise is, I think, a harder sell because people have to go in and probably do a little bit more work. Nutrition, people are already eating something, right? So we're just trying to change what they're eating. After that, then you can go into all sorts of different interventions. But what I did is I kind of forced myself to rate the interventions versus the physiologic impact, and then also the psychological ability for a client to change. And I think the error I've made in the past is that I put too much emphasis on the physiologic capacity only. So we could argue, we probably agree that, like sleep is probably super high on the list from a physiologic standpoint and fat loss and performance and just feeling better. But my experience when I'm talking to a lot of coaches, it's very hard to get good changes in sleep in people that stick. It's just not an easy point because people are busy. They don't want to go to bed 2 hours early or all these other things. So from a physiologic standpoint, sleep pretty high. From a psychological capacity to change, pretty crappy.
Right.
So then I go, okay, so how would I rate them? So I said, okay, leverage is just physiologic times the psychological aspect. So most of them are weighted in that equation. And what I find is that eating more protein is probably number one on the list, right? Super high physiologic capacity from appetite suppression, maintenance of lean mass, recovery. And you're also telling people to do something that's not that intuitive because they assume, oh my God, he said nutrition, he said diet, he's going to tell me just to stop eating everything. And what I tell clients is you can eat more protein. You can probably eat as much protein as you want, and it's not really going to be a big deal. So the action item in general at high level is eat more of this particular thing, which goes kind of against what they would expect. Most clients are able to do that much easier than like sleep or some of the other habits that are harder to change.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about really going to what's going to have the highest return when the lowest resistance factor from them. So they actually do it, right? So
yeah, the highest leverage point. Yeah.
Beautiful. Love it. Okay. What's the next step?
So the next step after that, I would say, is to put it into a system that's actually usable and manageable. Mm-hmm. And I found that if you're not really tracking compliance of any form, follow through is pretty horrible, right? So you want to give them, so we'll say we use example of protein. So I have kind of 5 different specific action items within protein, and I allow the client to pick which one, right? So we may say, okay, Bob comes in, Bob says, that's great, man, I want to do some nutrition work. Cool. Your option is, could you eat 30 grams of protein within 30 minutes in the morning? Or do we just want to take, let's say, your body weight, say 200 pounds times 0.7 and hit 140 grams of protein per day, right? And you just track, whole protein, fish, eggs, things like that. Don't track your broccoli protein, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. And I'll allow the client to select that. So they may say, okay, on a 1 to 10 scale, using motivational interviewing, 30 grams of protein within 30 minutes in the morning, that's probably a 9. He's like, I think that's pretty doable. Almost doubling the amount of protein I'm going to take in a day, that's probably a 6, right? So you'd say, cool. So you're now, a little action step now, Bob, is have 30 grams of protein within 30 minutes in the morning. You show them what that looks like, give them some options, right? So you're doing the education portion. Mm-hmm. And then you say, hey, we're just going to track that in a little system here. Right? So whether you want to use a spreadsheet, you can use fancy software, whatever you want. When you do this, just put a little X in there. And, we're going to run this. We're going to try to hit 90, 80% compliance for 1 to 3 weeks, see what the results are. Right? Because if they're not being compliant, you don't know if the intervention you gave them is correct or it was a correct intervention. They just weren't compliant when they did it. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they know someone's going to watch it. Right? So you just put someone in charge of follow-up. Again, you can use fancy systems or just old school pen and paper, texting, however you want to do it. And then because they have to report back to the person weekly, daily, however you want to run it, they're more likely to do that. And they can't really run away and be like, oh, I didn't know what to do and I wasn't sure what was going on, and kind of all the other excuses that tend to come up in that.
Got it. Okay. So it sounds like you're just boiling it down to really simple action steps and making it something that if you just do a little bit of follow-up and getting people to actually implement that first step, it's kind of like building blocks in how we're approaching this, rather than a kitchen sink approach where it's like, here's your entire new life when it comes to nutrition, here's your full new meal plan. Because in my experience, that very rarely does that actually stick. They're going to implement one piece of it. They're going to feel like a failure because they didn't do all the rest. And now their motivation to continue with the program is going to go way down. And much like training, we want to start with these baby steps. So it all makes sense. So question for you. So we said you could use a spreadsheet. You could use, fancy software and whatnot. How do you usually kind of package the whole deal if we kind of take a step back and say, like, someone starting with this, is this something where you're going to map? Do you work in cycles, for example? Like, is this you suggesting like, hey, let's work in 1 month blocks, 3 month blocks? Do you have any kind of starting point for someone who's like trying to get started with that?
Yeah. So in general, I find each intervention is about 2-ish weeks or so. And so in my head, I said, okay, all the things coaches could do with clients, especially more on the nutrition side, a little bit of lifestyle stuff. What are like kind of the top 8, right? So you have things like protein, you have things like carbohydrate amount, fat amount, exercise, so non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is just fancy word for move around more. Maybe the inverse, fasting, right, which is super trendy now, and sleep. So we kind of put those in order. Each one of those have their own 5 action steps. So in this case, we go back to Bob. Let's say Bob loves protein, man. I can eat bacon, I can eat, red meat. And he just, 30 grams of protein, 30 minutes, he crushes that in 2 weeks. And you may give him another protein thing, right? So, okay, now let's try to maybe scale you up to, 140 grams per day or 4 meals at 40 grams, right? So 160, pretty close, and work on that, and if he kind of maxes out all the protein stuff, then you may just go to whatever the next intervention is, and you rinse and repeat, right? Here's your 5 action items for, say, carbohydrates, and just kind of walk them through. So if you look at the high level, the framework, you have 40 different action steps that they can do, right? So you have 5 per 8 interventions, and they're not going to do all of them, right? Let's say they do half. You're already at programming for almost a year in that case. And again, like you said, I like the building blocks. You're trying to build these habits in so that they become very subconscious. So at the end of that year, or even 6 months, they're pretty solid on a lot of the nutrition stuff. Obviously, we'll feel better, move better, things of that nature too. And I really like what you said about not them feeling like a failure, right? I'm really a big fan of, from the neurology side, of positively associating those very small steps so you're successfully building on your success. If you give someone, I did meal plans years ago, legality aside, they give it to them, the person, this is great, and they love it for like 3 weeks, and then they don't follow it, and they feel like a absolute disaster. And I found that approach, just in general, with the exception of ultra highly motivated people, just doesn't work very well in the long term. The only exception now is I may give someone, like a private client, a meal plan so that they know where we're trying to get to and what it actually would look like. But in my head, I don't really expect them to hit that 100%. We may still be focusing on protein. I'm just trying to show them kind of what the end point looks like.
Got it. Okay. What do you have any suggestions for like the kind of measurement tool, right? Because if we look at like a 6-month or a 12-month plan, what are you going to use as milestones, or do you have any suggestions for this? Because obviously someone could be performance, it could be body composition. Do you have anything that you could suggest for someone to use for whether it's that bi-weekly, weekly, monthly accountability and progress measurement?
Yeah, so I like looking at 2 things. So one, what is the outcome that the person came to you for, right? So if their outcome is, let's say, body comp or performance, let's say if it's body comp, right? How are you going to determine if they're better, right? You could use pictures, you could use circumference, you could use their favorite pair of jeans, you could use all sorts of different things. The really catchy thing about body fat is that most of the consumer grade devices to measure it are not super good, right? So like MRI is great, DEXA pretty good, but even DEXA, if you've got experience with the machine and you can get access to it, which most people can't, you're looking at a 2 to 3% error on body fat percentage. So I think body fat percentage is one of those really catchy ones where even with medical grade equipment, it's not as precise as what we would like it to be. So I usually like pictures or circumference or something that's relatively more stable for that. And then also explaining to them it's going to be a little bit more of a longer term process, and there's going to be ups and downs within that. Performance is usually a little bit easier to measure, right? So you're trying to get stronger on your deadlift or your WOD time or whatever. That's a little bit more straightforward. The other part of then is I measure the process. So we want to measure what is the outcome, right? Are they making progress towards their goal that they said they wanted to work on with you? And then 2, what is their compliance in the process? So I really try to drive people to be more focused on the process, and the outcome it'll kind of happen and we'll make changes as we go along, instead of the inverse, people being hyper worried about the outcome. And it's actually the action items that you give them to do in the training that actually drive the outcome, not the other way around. Again, that's a longer term thing. It's a little bit harder to sell. But if you look at, say, all right, so you've had, let's see, 3 different action items. You've had each one for 2 weeks, and you've hit every single one of those at a 90% compliance. So you've been 90% compliance for 6 weeks. In my opinion, that's what you should reward people on, and a little bit less on the outcomes to get them very performance process driven in as they're going along. And then obviously looking to, make sure that they're matching up with where their goals are.
Awesome. And you actually have, so tell us about the flex diet a little bit. I want to understand people who are listening to this. Can you give us the once over on what it is, how it works?
So it's a mashup of kind of the theory of metabolic flexibility, which I did for my PhD. But it's just real simply, how does your body use carbohydrates? How does your body use fat? Combined with the theory of flexible dieting. So you've got room to play, kind of like the bowling alley analogy. They can kind of move a little bit as they go down the lane. And then it gives them a framework, if you're a coach, of how to process what are the 8 interventions, what is the ranking. You get a little bit of theory with each one. So I really forced myself to not go bananas on that. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, if I'm going to talk about intervention number 1 is protein, I have 1 hour to explain to you as a coach at an intermediate level, what is protein, why is it useful, right? I mean, we don't really get into what is protein per se, but why should you be concerned about certain types of protein? Why does leucine matter? What is muscle protein synthesis? What is recovery? I really forced myself to condense everything down to about an hour, which that was by far the hardest part. So you've got pretty good theory that's related to it. You've got an overview of the big picture. And then you've got your 5 specific action items that you're going to do. And then in addition to that, I had just kind of some expert interviews. So I went out and talked to like Dr. Stu Phillips, one of the premier protein researchers in the world, about protein and some very specific things like protein before bed. And then also guys like Jose Antonio, looking at if you eat too much protein, what happens? So we also have like the very deep level type stuff too.
That's awesome. And you have a lot of experience working not just directly with athletes, but like we said kind of at the top of the show, you're actually now helping train the coaches to be able to implement the flex diet at their gyms so that they can provide these kinds of programs and services to their clients, right?
Yeah, because I think at my heart I'm very much educator. I still teach online for different universities and different programs like that. Mm-hmm. And I think you just got to see this evolution as people go along. In my head, I'm like, okay, working with clients one-on-one is fun. Working with them online it's good. I like it. But I realized that even if I try to max out everything I could, I'm very limited on how many people I can work with. So what's kind of the next step up? Okay, what if I can design a system and educate coaches in each gym, right? So now I have more leverage to get a better system, more information to them that they can then distribute to maybe other coaches and people working in their gym. So for what I love doing, sit around reading research, testing stuff in the lab, doing all sorts of crazy things, I can now distribute more of that information to more people who can then help more people on the other end. So that makes me feel a little more warm and fuzzy too, because now I'm actually affecting more people with stuff that I literally just sit around and do for fun.
Right. Greater impact, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Teach the teachers.
Yep.
Awesome. Yep. Now, question for you. When approaching these types of programs, I know with the Flex Diet you have this all very dialed in, but a question I get a lot around like, well, where should I start in keto versus paleo versus whatever? What's your perspective on all that?
Yeah, that's a question I get all the time, right? Especially now that keto's popular. Like, so you walk in any gym and someone, runs up and goes, "Hey, should I do a ketogenic diet?" And I'm like, well, my first question is, well, what is your goal, right? Does your goal match the intervention you're trying to do? So what's the hallmark of a ketogenic diet? Super high fat, moderate to lowish protein by fitness standards, and ridiculously low amounts of carbohydrates, right? So less than 50 grams of carbs. If you start oogling too many bagels, you almost go over your limit of carbs for the day. What are you trying to do? Now, if you said, okay, I'm at a CrossFit gym, we do a lot of WODs, we do a lot of, glycolytic type exercise where you're burning through a lot of carbohydrates. A diet that severely restricts the fuel you're using, probably not going to be the best place to start, right? Mm-hmm. So I always ask them, what is your goal? What are you trying to do? Does the fuel that you're using during exercise match to the fuel that you're providing via your nutrition as a basic start? Now this is for, people who are healthy, people who are exercising. This is not in a therapeutic sense. We're not talking about, TBI and seizures and stuff like that, where the ketogenic diet may be extremely beneficial in more a medical supervised type model. So I always like to look at what are you trying to do? What are you trying to achieve? And even though like a ketogenic diet can quote unquote kind of work for that population, in my experience, it's about 4 to 6 weeks, and then all the wheels just fall off the cart. And I lost track of how many emails I get from people. Yeah, I was doing a ketogenic diet for 5 weeks. I was doing CrossFit, man. It was great. I felt amazing. And then I woke up one day and felt like dog crap, and I don't know why.
Yeah.
I'm like, I got some ideas for you.
Yeah, I have yet to come across an athlete in our realm, if you will, strength conditioning, CrossFit and whatnot, where they've been able to stick to it, beyond a couple of months and still feel okay. Usually it's very similar. It's like, hey, I'm trying this, I feel good, and then hit by a bus. What, just out of curiosity, what applications or what sport applications do you see it work well in, if any?
Ooh, for sport, I don't really find almost any, unless the person's got some weird, complicating issues of some form. The only time, and I've racked my brain over this too and looked at a crap ton of data, a lot of times people will say, well, what about endurance events, right? So endurance events, you think, oh, endurance event, I'm burning a crap ton of fat. Not if you're super competitive, right? So they did a study where they took very high level elite marathon runners, basically gave them a supplement / drug that blocked their body's ability to use fat, and they went out and ran. What did they find? Their times were literally almost the same as their best performance. Meaning that if they're running really, really freaking fast, we've got metabolic cart studies on this too, they're using almost all entirely carbohydrates. So again, going back to what is your goal? If someone comes to me and says, hey, it's just been my lifelong goal that I want to finish a marathon. I don't want to be top. I want to finish it. It's on my bucket list. And yeah, as a side effect, I'd like a little bit better body composition. Okay. Yeah, maybe pulling back on some carbohydrates, teaching the body to use more fat as a fuel. In that circumstance, could be pretty useful. For a ketogenic, which is like the extreme of that, right? You don't have to be ketogenic to use fat. A lot of people get that kind of mixed up. The only time I've been able to think of it is if you're doing there's some crazy 24 to 48 hour races where you're maybe doing multiple modalities or hikes or things of that nature, where you're actually not allowed any fuel stations. You have to carry everything that you're going to use during that time period on yourself when you start the race. So at that point, you're going to trade off and go, ooh, I'm going to probably pull back from some of the performance stuff, because if I can really train my body to use fuel better and I can pack very super calorically dense things, which are fat, then that's probably an advantage because you have to carry all your food source with you during that time. Outside of that, that's kind of the only one that I think there would be a massive advantage to it.
Got it. Okay, good. Good to know. Thank you.
More detail than you probably wanted.
No. I get asked personally a lot, and I don't have the background that you have in being able to explain that, because I have not heard of any athletes that have said it's improved my performance. Like I said, at least not in this in the sandbox we play in. And but it seems to just be everywhere. And I have buddies I bump into constantly. They're like, oh, I'm doing this, I'm feeling great. I'm like, when did you start? No, just a couple weeks ago. And I'm like,
yeah.
Okay, I'm curious to see how this pans out. And so far everyone's fallen off. So that was kind of a sidebar, but thanks. So where can people learn more about you, about the Flex diet? I know you've put something together for our listeners today, or our viewers today.
Yeah.
Where can they go to learn more?
Yeah, so if they want to learn more, obviously general websites, just miketnelson.com. Flex Diet is just flexdiet.com. And then for all the listeners today too, it's miketnelson.com, just /Gymwright. So all one word, no spaces, lowercase. And what you'll do is put your little name and email in there, and I'll actually send you all of module 1. So we'll send you the big picture video, the 5 action steps, the theory, and then actually 2 expert interviews for that. So they can, take the whole module. They can literally have enough with that to go play around with their clients, try to assign it to people, get feedback, and just give it a good old test run.
Love it. Thank you for putting that together for us. Much appreciated.
Yeah, no problem.
Awesome. Question I like to ask everyone who's on the show. In one sentence, if you could give one piece of advice to a gym owner, what would it be?
Oh, one sentence. I would say that for clients who want better body composition and performance, nutrition is a massive part of the equation that many times is left untapped, both from a results basis with clients and then also from a financial perspective for the gym too.
Yeah, no question. It's in my experience in all the gyms that we coach, business coaching wise, implementing a premium service is one of the key initiatives that we always focus on. And when in doubt, the nutrition tends to be, if you're not, oftentimes we'll take some personal training, we'll take custom program design, which are from a training standpoint, the next step in the ascension. But what applies to all of them as a blanket is the nutrition. So it's a really, really big lever to pull in your business because you can raise your average client value dramatically. And not to mention just testimonials and results for people are, that's what they're really there for, right? And this is what finishes the loop. So thank you, Mike, for being on today. It was a pleasure having you. Where else can people find more about you if they want to follow you? Actually, I'll answer that question. First of all, your newsletter is one of my very favorite newsletters. I've been following you personally for years. You send out frequently, and I still enjoy every single one that you send out. So I'm personally a fan anyway. But aside from visiting miketnelson.com and signing up for the newsletter, where else can people find more about you?
Yeah, I am on the old the Facebook a little bit, so people can find me there. I think my profile page in general is kind of maxed out, so they'd have to go to the business page there, which is just facebook.com /Dr. Mike T. Nelson. So DrMikeTNELSON. That and the website are probably the main ones. And if they go to the miketnelson.com /Gymwright, they'll get the full module, and they'll also automatically go on my newsletter after that too. So
awesome.
They'll have all the fun stuff there. Most of the content I put out now is probably 90% of it is actually through the newsletter, which, thank you for your comment. I enjoy writing for that. It's been super fun.
Very good, man. Well, again, thank you very much for being on. It was a pleasure having you. Always a pleasure chatting with you. And those of you watching, make sure you check them out. miketnelson.com. Sign up for the newsletter. Visit the Flex Diet, the Gymwright link to get that first module. And Mike, looking forward to connecting with you again soon, man. Pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, hope to see you again in person. It's always a good time.
Yes, sir. Cool. All right, guys. We'll see you again next week. And thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.